Greetings, everyone. My name is Janet Othero. I'm an advocate practicing with TripleOk Law Advocates in Nairobi. I am in the larger commercial group, but specifically in the technology, media, and technology practice group, where we offer corporate support services and legal support services to our clients who operate within the fintech sector, the financial sector, the telecommunication sector. And our broad areas of practice usually cover fintech regulations and advisory. We also do data protection advisory and legal support. But in addition to that, we also offer cybersecurity and legal advice and support as well within our practice group. So today we are going to be looking at what the data protection scene in Kenya looks like since the enactment of the law in 2019 and the setup of the regulator last year going towards this year. So welcome to this engagement.
Excellent. Janet, thank you very much. And of course, it's a pleasure to have you in the Privacy Rules Alliance as exclusive member for the Kenyan jurisdiction. So everyone who's listening to us or looking at this recording is warmly invited to contact Janet and TripleOk Law for any legal advice, and specifically data protection and technology law legal advice in Kenya. So Janet, definitely a lot going on in Kenya in this period. We know that the Data Protection Act entered into force less than 1 month ago. So can you describe for our audiences the main elements of the Act?
Yes. So our Act is basically an offshoot or a mirror of what the EU GDPR is about, because it actually provides for more or less the same provisions as the EU GDPR, where we are looking at it trying to describe what processing activities are, trying to lay out the principles when it comes to processing personal data, outlining what the rights of the data subject ought to be, also giving a highlight in terms of what measures organizational and technical organizations should have in place. What is different in probably our Act is that there's a mandatory requirement for all data processors and data controllers to be registered with the regulator. It also sets up the office of the regulator and outlines some of the obligations and the mandates this office would have in terms of just the regulatory and supervisory space of data protection. In addition to that, it also just gives certain regulations in terms of how to go about operationalizing some of the provisions of the Act, and the regulations go into details with regards to some of the provisions of the Act. But that's it in a nutshell in terms of understanding what the Data Protection Act of Kenya looks like from a high level.
Thank you very much, Janet, for this introduction. You were saying that this is largely based on the GDPR, but there is certainly one striking element of difference, which is the one related to possible criminal liability in cases of violation of the Act. Can you tell us, in your opinion and based on your expertise, what would you advise executives to do in order to avoid these criminal liability, if it's true that actually there is such a provision in the Act?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting question, in fact, because some of the enforcement provisions of our Act provide for personal liability to the extent that if there are certain notices or certain conditions that have been placed by the regulator for a person to observe or a corporate entity to observe. But in addition to that, if there's a complaint or there's an audit that is done and an inspection that is done that raises certain compliance issues that have not been complied with, the Act actually outlines that the person found liable for these things, and it does not say the corporate entity or it doesn't say the organization. It says the person. It's very clear. It says the person found not complying with the certain enforcement notices or the person breaching these sort of regulations will be found liable if presented in a court of law. And it provides for a financial or a pecuniary fine of certain amounts. But in addition to that, it also provides for imprisonment up to several years for not complying with some of these provisions. Now, looking at the fact that there's imprisonment on the table, opposed to the alternative of a cash penalty, it means that some individuals sitting within an organization may face some jail term if there's a level of compliance they're not meeting. So looking at yourself as an organization, as a business entity, what have you done towards compliance and what are you doing towards maintaining these compliance levels, so that if any person in your organization is found culpable of not complying, you do not want to be looking at prison term for some of your officers, but you also don't want to be losing money in terms of paying penalties ever so regularly with the regulator. So as a business, it's important to you to look back and see whether you are fulfilling some of the minimum requirements towards compliance, and if you're not, you'd better take action to ensure that the officers within your organizations are also well protected in their day-to-day operations.
This is a fundamental point, definitely, Janet. Thank you very much for this. And once more, we cannot underline enough that is fundamental to receive legal advice. We are seeing in other countries that personal liability of individuals having executive functions, managerial functions in companies, it's happening. For instance, in China, there is a personal liability also for violations of the new Chinese privacy law. So the GDPR, to some extent, has created a sort of so-called best international standards. So there is a lot of comparative conformity to that. But actually, some countries like Kenya actually are going beyond with the introduction of these measures. Now, if we talk about registration, evidently, there are some entities that need to register with the authorities. So can you tell us which are the entities that have to register, and what is your advice, again, for their managers to do that rapidly and fully?
Thank you. So the Act provides for data processors in its definition and data controllers to include corporate entities, but also natural persons who may be doing any sort of processing activities on personal data. But registration is mandatory for certain organizations, and what the Act actually did is to list about 15 to 17 sort of sectors or entities operating in certain sectors that must register as a matter of mandatory. And some of them include those in the financial space, the telecommunication space, the children education space or education space, healthcare services, and all that. And they've listed them on their website to say that these are organizations that must mandatorily register as a matter of requirement. But now, for the others that may not be listed, it doesn't mean that you still don't fall within the ambit of registration. It just means that there is no higher threshold on you to register as opposed to those who are listed in the mandatory listing, which is available on the ODPC website. Now, with regards to registration of other entities, about July 14th of 2022, the regulator went live with its platform for registration and has provided for parameters within which, as an organization, to check yourself to see whether there's a registration, a mandatory registration, first of all, and even if it is registration as a matter of just meeting minimum requirements of compliance, the category within which you fall. There are some organizations which are exempt, and these are organizations which, depending on the number of employees you have or the minimum turnover you have, you do not really require to be registered as a matter of mandatory concern. But also, as best practice, like you said, it's good to register because as long as you're processing personal data, you need to show the regulator that you're complying, but also some of the business partners that you're working with who will ask for whether you've complied as a matter of now doing business, because it's becoming an item in the checklist of most businesses. Are you complied, and do you have a certificate of registration? So it's open to everybody to register, but there's the top 17 entities, sectors where you're operating in that must, as a matter of priority, be mandatorily registered.
Thank you very much. And it's important to underline that this doesn't refer only to businesses. My understanding, it actually also refers to educational institutions, to NGOs, to even to religious institutions. So it is very important that everyone operating in Kenya goes in the website of the regulatory authority, checks, verifies whether they fall in the category. And in case of doubt, actually, of course, they can contact Janet Othero from TripleOk Law for guidance and advice. So, Janet, thank you very much. I think this was an excellent introduction to the recent changes to the data protection landscape in Kenya. Everyone knows that Kenya is one of the most thriving countries in Africa, and where there is a lot of investment in data, in technology. So once more, we invite everyone to contact Janet to discover more in these regards. Thank you very much, Janet. It was a pleasure having with you for this Privacy Espresso today.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Looking forward to more engagements and wishing everybody luck with complying with the data protection regulations.